Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to episode 13 of the Beware the Day podcast. My name is Ryan. I want to thank all of you for joining me today. I want to thank Black El Paso Voice for this platform. I encourage you to subscribe and follow me on all my socials, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Apple, iHeart, and Spotify. And if you want to donate to this podcast, please follow the links that are on your screen. Now, of course, as you are well aware, one of the major themes of this podcast is creating and preserving generational wealth. If that's something that is of interest to you, please visit my Facebook page, KRC Companies LLC. Leave me a message, and we will definitely have a conversation about building and preserving generational wealth. Before we dive into our subject this week, which is employment challenges during the Reagan administration, our Black History Spotlight this week features, again, someone that 99% of you probably have never heard of. So I like looking for these hidden figures in our history and highlight them on a weekly basis. This week, we're going to talk about Eunice Carter. Has anybody ever heard of Eunice Carter? Probably not, but you're going to get to know her by the time we're done today. Eunice Hunton Carter was born July 16, 1899 in Atlanta, Georgia, to William Alpheus Sr. and Addie Waite Hunton, who were also prominent educators and activists. The family moved to Brooklyn, New York when Eunice was 5 years old in response to the Atlanta Race Riot of 1906. Hunton received a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts in 1921. While writing her master's thesis at Smith College, she was introduced to then Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge, who became her trusted advisor. Following graduation in 1921, Hunton worked as a social worker before marrying dentist Lyle Carter in 1924. Several years later, and after the birth of their son, she began studying law at Fordham University, and in 1934 became the first African-American woman to pass the New York State Bar. Eunice Hunton Carter entered politics in 1934 when she was nominated by the Republican Party to represent New York's 19th District in the State Assembly. The first African-American to gain the Republican nomination for that office, Carter's campaign centered on the need to reduce the age limit for pension, enforce compliance with legal standards for tenement housing, and the continuation of unemployment insurance. She also opposed racial discrimination in public works employment. Carter narrowly lost by 1,600 votes. Following the 1935 riots in Harlem, Mayor LaGuardia appointed her secretary on the Committee on Conditions in Harlem. That same year, Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey appointed her his deputy assistant in what was to that point the largest prosecution of organized crime in U.S. history. Carter provided the essential legal strategy in convincing Charles Lucky Luciano, the most important mafia crime boss in New York City, by marshaling a massive assault on organized prostitution in New York City. So it was her strategy that led to a prostitution conviction against Charles Lucky Luciano. Authorities raided 200 brothels to gain testimony against Luciano, which eventually came from 3 sex workers. At the time, this was the largest organized crime prosecution in U.S. history. Carter served as assistant district attorney of New York County for 10 years. In 1938, Carter was named to Dewey's staff to lead the Abandonment Bureau of Women's Courts. In 1945, she entered private practice and connected her work with the National Council of Negro Women to international issues. Now, at this point, this is when she gets involved in international women's politics on a grand scale. In 1947, Carter was one of 15 American women invited to attend the first International Assembly on Women in Paris to discuss human and educational problems affecting peace and freedom. While there, Carter and Madame Simone Sawyer Brunard of Belgium, the president of the Union of Colonial Women, compared conditions in African colonies with the status of African Americans in the United States. She was also a consultant to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations International Council of Women. In 1955, Carter was elected to chair the International Conference of Non-Governmental Organizations. 2 years later, she attended the United Nations-sponsored Commission on the Status of Women at Geneva, Switzerland, the European headquarters of the United Nations. While there, she was elected chairman of the Conference of International Organizations and consultative status with the United Nations. She also served on the executive committee of the International Council of Women. Also in 1957, Carter attended the International Council of Women of the World as representative of the National Council of Women in the United States. So are you keeping up with all these chairmanships and appointments? She was also active in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the National Urban League, the Young Women's Christian Association, and served as legal advisor to the National Council of Negro Women and field representative for the Manhattan Office of Civilian Defense. Eunice Hunton Carter died in New York City on January 25th, 1970, at the age of 70 years old. If you want to learn more about the life of Eunice Carter, you can go to the internet and pull up the Hidden Histories documentary at the PBS website. That documentary first aired in February of 2023. So, ladies and gentlemen, Eunice Carter. I learned quite a bit about her. I found out about Eunice Carter. I was watching a documentary on the mafia, and they talked about this black female attorney who brought down Lucky Luciano. I said, I wonder who that could have been. And one thing led to another, and here we are. So I hope you enjoyed that Black History Spotlight. Let us briefly recap what we talked about last week. We talked about, of course, the struggle for equality in the field of employment. We talked about how affirmative action began to lose ground during the Reagan administration. And we talked about several Supreme Court rulings that impacted progress for African Americans in the workplace. So today we're going to continue our discussion of employment challenges during the Reagan administration. Now, you may or may not be aware, but one of the first things that Ronald Reagan did after taking office, that he basically declared war on domestic spending. His first target was affordable housing. Spending on housing subsidies fell from $26 billion down to $2 billion in 1981. Federally financed production of subsidized housing fell by more than 82%. Now, the Reagan administration introduced the concept of empowerment zones in enterprise communities in an effort to revitalize economically depressed communities. Businesses were encouraged to locate and operate in targeted communities through a system of incentives that reduced labor costs, taxes, and regulatory burdens. In return, businesses were supposed to provide employment opportunities and increase economic prospects. Now, it sounds like an incredible plan, but there were some drawbacks. The enterprise zone concept has not been very effective in our communities when it comes to building long-term economic stability and growth. The initiative attracted a disproportionate number of traditional line Black businesses, such as barbershops and beauty parlors, that employed a small number of employees, which had very little impact on Black unemployment. Empowerment zones tend to promote jobs that offer low wages, rely on minimal technology, and are generally non-unionized. Enterprise zones failed to address discriminatory financing practices. Banks were more likely to finance businesses in the suburbs rather than in the inner city. I was able to find one success story. This was Jersey City, New Jersey. Has one of the nation's longest surviving enterprise zones. Since 1983, the state's urban enterprise program has offered a sales tax incentive to encourage shoppers to patronize the small businesses along Central Avenue in that business district. Businesses in the zone can charge half the state sales tax rate of 6.625%. The businesses also can get tax savings for hiring new staff and undertaking capital improvement projects. So that's just a very small sample of what we had to deal with during the Reagan administration. Again, basically by him declaring war on domestic spending, those cuts in domestic spending trickled down into our communities and affected our ability to work and earn a living. So next week, we're going to talk about the high cost of poverty, why the poor pay more. Believe it or not, being poor in the United States is one of the most expensive enterprises that anyone will encounter. And I'm sure you will enjoy next week's podcast. And again, I want to thank Black El Paso Voice for this platform. Be sure to tune in to Suite 915 with Curtis and Fedora and Real Talk with Marcus McCoy. And please support this podcast by visiting the links that are on the screen. Once again, thank you for tuning in to the Beware the Day podcast. I want to thank you. And always remember that Black History Month is from January 1st through December 31st. Take care, and we'll see you next time.